Hello everyone and welcome to Sicom Monday. I'm your host Nicole Wood. For those of you who are new to the broadcast, we try to make this as engaging a platform as possible. So please feel free to send in any of your comments and questions via the integrated chat module on Periscope. And if you're watching this broadcast on replay, please feel free to send in your questions and comments via Twitter by our various handles. You can reach me at the Sicom Monday handle or at my personal handle of Wildlife BioGal. And then today we'll be talking with Samantha Leigh. She's a PhD student at the University of California, Irvine. And she's going to be, you can reach her at her handle of C_science_Sam, so C Science Sam. And we're going to be talking with her about her work with Bonnethead sharks, which admittedly before I talked to Sam, I never knew anything about. So Sam, welcome to the broadcast and tell us all about the fun with Bonnethead sharks and what makes them so cool.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here and telling you about my research. So I'm interested in shark digestive physiology. So what sharks eat, how they process the food that they eat, and also what they're excreting into their environments. When we think about sharks in general, we normally think of them as strict carnivores. And you always see sharks on TV consuming huge dolphins and marine mammals and things like that. But sharks eat a huge variety of different food types, spanning from microscopic zooplankton to thousands of different species of fish, mollusks, crustaceans. And what makes the bonnethead shark really unique, which is the specific species that I'm studying now, is that they're the only shark that we know to be eating large amounts of seagrass material. So there was a study that came out about 10 years ago now that did a gut content analysis. So they literally measured the mass of the different gut contents that they found in bonnethead shark digestive tracts and found that up to 62% of those gut contents were seagrass. So this is totally unique to any shark species that we know of. So what I'm working on now is trying to figure out how they're able to process that amount of seagrass material, knowing that they have a digestive tract that very closely, at least morphologically, resembles their more carnivorous relatives.
Yeah, so how often is it that you see carnivores like this, of where we just are always assuming that they're, just eating meat, that we're actually finding out now that they are consuming more plant material? Because, this is really interesting. Like, I'd never heard of a shark that would eat grass. They're basically almost kind of like a sea cow in a way, now that I'm imagining it, rather than, what most of us think of when we think of sharks is they're going and, preying on all these different fish and other organisms out there. Are there other examples of, carnivores like this that are classic carnivores that we're now finding out are actually omnivores?
There are quite a few species of fish and terrestrial organisms as well that will transfer from carnivory to either omnivory or sometimes even herbivory throughout their lifespan. In terms of an entire species shifting to a new type of diet, that's something that we do see over the course of evolutionary timescales, but for the bonnethead specifically, we don't really know when this behavior started. It could be something that they've always done, and we just never really knew that they were doing it.
Do you think that's something that is probably fairly often, like you find that in the animal kingdom of where there's all these really cool behaviors, but just because someone's not studying that particular species, that people just aren't noticing it, and it's something that they're doing quite often. Like, how many researchers are there out there studying bonnethead sharks? Is this a commonly researched species, or are you the only one out there really, getting to play around with them?
So in terms of their digestive physiology, there's probably a handful of people that are studying them. They study them for lots of other different reasons. They have really interesting sensory systems, and they're generally a smaller shark that is fairly hardy in captivity, so they can be used for lots of other studies when you're trying to make assumptions about larger, more endangered or threatened species that we can't study. So they are a commonly studied shark, but in terms of their digestive physiology, this is pretty new stuff.
Cool. Yeah, that's always fun when you get to jump in on something kind of new and get to really explore something like this. Because, yeah, finding out something along these lines where no one else knew it, it's always kind of fun to be the first one to come along and say, hey, look at this cool thing
Yeah,
we discovered. So,
definitely.
could you tell us a little bit more about the bonnetheads? Like, we think of they're what related to hammerheads. They kind of look like them. Like, how closely related are they in the same family? Give us a little bit more rundown about what the bonnethead is, please.
Sure. So the bonnethead shark is one of the members of the hammerhead family. They are the smallest species in the hammerhead family, but they're often mistaken for juvenile great hammerheads or scalloped hammerheads. But they are a different species, and one of the ways that you can tell them apart is by the shape of their head. So they do have what looks like the unique kind of broad head. However, theirs is quite a bit more rounded than if you look at a great hammerhead. It's very rectangular, and this one is much more rounded, like a bonnet on your head.
Is that where the name actually comes from? Is because it looks like a bonnet that you would wear on your head?
Yes, I think it is actually.
Wow, interesting. I never would have thought that at all. Like, I was just,
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking of what it could be. But yeah, I guess it makes sense now that you say that. Um,
hmm
so where can we find these sharks? I know you said that you do your research in the Florida Keys. Are they just around the Florida Keys, or is this a common species throughout the world?
You can find them actually in a lot of waters throughout the world. They're generally found in warmer climates. And there is a very large population of them in the Florida Keys, Gulf of Mexico area. And that's the only or the only populations that have been studied in terms of their ability to eat seagrass. So other species, for example, off the coast of Baja California in the Pacific, they could be doing something entirely different. And we actually haven't gotten a chance to look at those yet.
Do you think it might just be because there's a lot of seagrass in those particular areas, and so they're just taking advantage of something there that might not be available somewhere else? So their diets could be different, such as orcas. They prey on different things depending on where they're at. Do you think that that could be a possibility with the bonnethead shark?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a huge amount of seagrass in this area. If you go out into the Florida Keys, there's just seagrass meadows for miles. So there is a lot of it out there, but it's also home to a lot of other species that are common in the bonnethead shark diet. So crabs and shrimp and things like that that would live within the grass. So in terms of the shark incidentally consuming the grass, that is definitely a really big possibility that they're going after these more proteinaceous food items living in the grass and consuming a lot of grass along with it. However, the fact that they're actually able to get something out of the grass means that they can act a little bit more generalist and not necessarily care if they're consuming large amounts of plant material.
Interesting. Yeah, so just a reminder to everyone out there on Periscope, we're chatting here with Samantha Leigh. She's from University of California, Irvine, and she studies bonnethead sharks. So if you have any questions for Sam or myself, please send them in via the integrated chat module here on Periscope, and we'll do our best to answer them. And if you send them through or you miss them, feel free to repeat the questions, because with the way Periscope goes, it always flies through so fast. So feel free to keep sending in those questions and we'll get to them. So I have another question. So how are you going through the process of actually studying their gut contents? Can you give us a little rundown of how the research goes? Like, how do you do this? How do you know what it is that they're eating?
Yeah, so I generally go to the Florida Keys for a couple months during the summer. And we take a small boat out just right off the coast of Long Key, usually. And the water is very shallow there. Where we are catching the sharks, it gets to be about probably a maximum of 5-6 feet deep. So it's not very deep water where we're catching the sharks. And we lay out a really long gill net perpendicular to the shore and chum the water in the surrounding area to entice the sharks to come. And pretty much the water is shallow enough that generally if a shark gets caught, especially in the top half of our gill net, we can see it splashing and jump in right away and make sure we detangle it. But if it gets caught towards the bottom, sometimes we won't necessarily notice it right away. So we do gill net checks every 15 minutes to make sure that we're not missing any of the sharks that get caught. Once we catch the sharks, we bring them back to the lab, and I collaborate with Florida International University. So we bring the sharks back there and run feeding trials with them. So I feed them essentially a 90% seagrass diet. So they're getting a lot of seagrass in their diet. And we feed them about 5% of their body weight per day. So they're getting a lot of seagrass material. And the seagrass that I'm feeding them, we've done something a little bit special to it. So the seagrass is grown also in the lab in a separate closed tank system where we can enrich the atmosphere where the sharks or where the seagrass is growing with carbon-13, which is essentially a tracer that we can then track if the shark is consuming the seagrass, digesting it, and assimilating any nutrients from those plant tissues that are labeled with that tracer. Then through blood draws, we can see if that tracer is being assimilated or not as well. So that's kind of a surefire way to say, yes, these sharks are assimilating seagrass material. So we do blood draws throughout the trial. We also collect a fair amount of fecal material from the sharks, which is a very glamorous job.
Hey, hashtag science poop.
Yeah,
we all love it.
Yeah, but we use that so that we can measure the amount of certain types of nutrients in the plant material that we're feeding them. So, for example, we could measure the amount of proteins in the seagrass, and then we can do the same measurement on the fecal material. So we can, through a pretty easy calculation, determine what percent of that protein material was actually digested by the shark. And then we also take, at the end of the experiment, some samples from their gut tissues and their gut contents. So at this point, we know what we were feeding the sharks, so we know what their content should be. But what we don't know is more of the biochemical stuff that's going on inside of their digestive tract at this point. So what we want to measure is what types of digestive enzymes they have, because different enzymes break down different types of nutrients. So if they have enzymes that are specific to breaking down cellulose, which is a huge component in seagrass, then we'll know that they at least have the right tools to be able to break it down. And then one of the other things that we use the gut contents for, or will be using very soon, is for looking at the microbial communities that live in the shark gut. Generally, herbivores and omnivores have a really robust microbial community that helps to break down the plant material, because generally, even us as humans don't necessarily produce the enzymes that we need to break down plant material. Or at least cellulose specifically. So these sharks likely are not producing it themselves either. They likely have a microbial community helping them do that. So yeah, there's lots of different lab analyses going on, but we're trying to get at exactly what the sharks are getting out of the grass, and then also the mechanism behind how they're even able to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because like you think about how well are they able to process this, and how well are they able to get the nutrients out of it, because how nutrient rich is seagrass? Is it something that, like, in theory, if they could be able to sustain themselves on, if they have that microbial community to break it down? I mean, because other organisms just eat seagrass and survive. So do you think maybe if the sharks are developing those microbial communities, that they could just purely survive on the seagrass then?
It's definitely possible. Like I said, I was feeding them a 90% seagrass diet, and they were fed that diet for 3 weeks, and all of the sharks in the experiment gained weight. So they were definitely getting something out of it. In terms of the microbial communities, helping them out, a lot of times diet helps shape what the microbial community becomes. So in order to make sure that we were looking at not only the sharks that we were feeding in the lab, which we controlled what they were eating, we also looked at wild caught sharks to see if their microbial communities could be different.
Interesting. So, like, if I just ate, a whole bunch of cauliflower versus eating a giant steak, my microbial communities, in theory, should be different than just based off on what I'm eating.
Yeah, and your enzymes, your digestive enzymes that you're producing definitely vary depending on what you're eating and when you're eating. So if you just ate lunch, for example, then you'd have a different set of enzymes than you do when you just wake up in the morning and haven't even eaten breakfast yet.
Interesting. So that might explain why if I don't eat fast food for a while and I go back and eat it, it's not always like the most desirable thing. Then I feel kind of like, ugh. But if I'm eating
Hmm.
fast food for a while, like say when I'm out in the field and there's no other choice of anything to eat, you kind of get used to it and you don't really notice it anymore. So could that
Yeah,
possibly be because of the microbial community causing those differences then?
definitely. Over time, your microbial community will definitely adjust to what you're eating, and your digestive tract in general will adjust to what you're eating. So, yeah, over time, that definitely would make sense.
So the sharks are experiencing that same thing. And so like do the sharks, as they're moving through their life, are they changing their diets at all? Are you finding like younger sharks are, eating more or less plant material versus adults? And then, how is that going? Because are they all living still in those same areas of where they'd be eating the same thing? Or, are they moving off somewhere? Like kind of talk us a little bit, about that. Is there any differences along the lifespans?
Sure. So generally, bonnetheads aren't big migratory species. So they generally stay within the same geographic area for their entire lives, and they're usually found fairly close to shore in coastal regions. We are finding more seagrass in the guts of juvenile bonnethead sharks. Um, so just in general, when we were looking at the 62% gut content analyses that happened in 2007, that was mainly found in juveniles, but there were instances of adults where it was still up to 40% of their diet was seagrass. So it's still pretty consistent part of their diet throughout their life, but it does seem to taper off a little bit as they get older.
Do you think it's just that they're better at hunting and are able to better, like, pinpoint in on the prey species that they're going after, or just maybe their nutritional needs have changed slightly and thus they're not consuming as much of that? Like, what do you think could possibly be the reasons behind that?
Yeah, it could definitely be both. So, as they're getting older, they're definitely going to be better hunters. They're going to be able to go after bigger food items, so they're not limited necessarily by size as much of the prey that they're going after. And then you're right in also assuming that their nutritional demands will change. So, once they reach maturity, then they are going to be in their reproductive state. So more protein is actually going to be more beneficial for them to be able to reproduce with a lot of efficiency.
Great, awesome. So, just a reminder, everyone out there in Periscope land, I'm talking with Samantha Leigh. She's a PhD student from University of California, Irvine, and she studies bonnethead sharks. They're one of the smaller members of the hammerhead family. So, what are some of the really cool things that you like about bonnetheads that maybe other people don't know besides, in addition to the whole fact that they are eating plants? Like, what are some other cool things about them that you've discovered?
So I think they're pretty cool just because they are the smallest species in the hammerhead family. I think that makes them kind of cute. um, but in terms of things that are different about bonnet heads, well, something that is pretty unique to hammerheads in general, and actually all sharks do have these, but the hammerheads are pretty great at it because of their broad head base, is they have these sensory organs that help them to sense electromagnetic waves in the water. So hammerheads in general are actually really great hunters. Think of when you go to the beach and you use a metal detector to find things in the sand. That's essentially what they're doing, but they don't need extra material to do that or equipment. They can just do it with their bodies. So that's something that's pretty cool about sharks in general, but hammerheads specifically are very good at it.
Yeah, is it just because they have more of these sensory nodes around their snout than what other sharks do, and they just have that larger head that they can really like pinpoint in? Like, why? What makes them
Yeah,
so great? Is it?
Yeah, so the surface area of their head is just in general larger, proportional to their body compared to other sharks. So they do have more space for those sensory organs. And then you generally find them kind of cruising very close to the ocean floor of where they're living. So that makes them even more particularly good because they can find things that, like I mentioned before, are living within the grass. They don't necessarily have to be, swimming out in open water and hope that there's something below them. There's definitely going to be stuff living within the seagrass.
Nice. Yeah, because I have to admit, like seeing like the sensory nodes on here, it's just they look really cool. Are there different various sensory nodes, or do they all do the same thing? Like, what are they sensing specifically? Are they all like for the exact same thing, just those electromagnetic, or just are there other sensor nodes that they have around on their snouts there?
So those are all sensing electromagnetic waves. Fish also have what's called a lateral line. So it's a slightly different set of sensory organs that is along their body on either side. And those can pick up very small like wave motions in the water. So they're able to tell if there's something big nearby or if there's prey nearby. So those are a different sensory system, but both help with capturing prey and avoiding predators.
Nice. So like are bonnetheads like do they have a really good lateral line system compared to other sharks, or is it pretty much on par with the abilities of other sharks as well?
Yeah, they're pretty on par with the abilities of other sharks, as far as I know.
Nice. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about some of the regulations and things for studying these animals? Like, what do you need to be able to go out and study this? Do you have to have special licenses for studying these particular species? Are they endangered or threatened that you would need special licenses? Like, what's the status of that and how you go about doing that?
Yeah, so bonnethead sharks are not threatened or endangered. They're actually the only species in the hammerhead family that we know is not threatened or endangered. So that makes them slightly easier to study than some of the other species in the family. We did need to get a special activity license from Fish and Wildlife in Florida to be able to catch the sharks. And then, of course, we needed IACUC approval from Florida International University to be able to run the feeding trials with them. But they are much easier to study than, say, the scalloped hammerhead, which is an endangered species in a lot of areas.
Yeah, so with doing your research so far away from your university, how does that like compounded your research? Do you find it really hasn't been that much trouble, or is it just really like because you have such a limited season? I'm assuming because you can only probably be out there a certain amount of time. Like, how does that all work with your research being so far away from your home base there?
Sure. So it's definitely tough. Every time I go to Florida, I need to bring a lot of supplies with me. Luckily, I have some great collaborators in Florida who are able to kind of fill in the gaps of some of the bigger things that I can't transport very easily. But it definitely adds a layer of difficulty. It's definitely more expensive to have to travel to do your field work. There's the added layer of difficulty of you're just not in your home institution, your home lab, so you don't necessarily know where to go, who to ask for help from, things like that. When I went this past summer to Florida, I spent a little bit over 2 months there. And that was enough time to get the work done that I needed to in the field with the sharks. And then all of the samples that I collected during that time, I bring back with me here to UC Irvine and do all the lab analyses here. So luckily, I'm able to at least do that part at the University of California, Irvine. So, which is honestly the majority of the most time-consuming work. So, yeah.
So how much fun is it trying to bring? I'm assuming you're probably bringing those samples back on the plane, or are you like shipping them back? Because I'm wondering, like, as you're going through security, like, do you have science poop samples right there with you that you're having to explain to them, like, hey, this is from a shark, it's okay, like, how easy is it to get your samples back to your own lab?
So it actually isn't so bad because the bonnethead shark is not endangered and because I'm not traveling internationally. If I was collecting sharks from Mexico, for example, it would probably be a lot more difficult to bring samples back into the US. but it's actually not so bad. I always bring the special activity license with me and the IACUC and all the paperwork that we need just in case anyone asks any questions. A lot of times people are kind of just curious because you do have to bring a lot of the samples on the plane with you as a carry-on, so not, even as a checked bag. So it does have to go through security. It goes through the x-ray machine. So I always get lots of questions about what the heck I'm transporting. But it's always entertaining to tell people that it's, just shark poop, just harmless shark poop.
Yeah, I bet you get some fun looks from security as you're doing that, because I could only imagine if I was carrying through like some science poop samples with me, the looks I probably would get from security, like, say what?
Yeah, they always think I'm a little crazy, but
Yeah. So when you're in the lab, can you kind of run us through the process of how you're analyzing these samples? Like, kind of give us like you know the dummies version of like what it is you're doing. Like if we were like just to like jump right in and we had no clue, kind of tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So for the enzyme assays, we use the gut tissues that we take from the bonnethead sharks as well as the gut contents. And a lot of times I'll take mucosal scrapings from the tissue as well. So there's a little layer in between the actual tissue wall of the intestine and the gut contents themselves. It's a little mucus layer. And a lot of times there's different enzymes in that there would be in the contents or even produced by the tissue itself. So we take those three things, and for the enzyme assays, we want to look at a couple different things. We want to look at the main macronutrient groups. So we're looking for proteases that would degrade proteins, carbohydrases, degrading carbohydrates, lipases, which degrade lipids, and then also looking at enzymes that degrade cellulase, which is a big component of seagrass. And essentially what we do is we use a spectrophotometer to measure the activity of enzymes. So we combine the gut tissue sample, for example, which is assumed to have the enzyme in it, with the substrate that enzyme would break down. So for example, if we're looking at a carbohydrate, something that a carbohydrate would break down would be a starch. So we combine the shark tissue sample that presumably has the enzyme with it with a starch, and then over time see how much of that starch is reduced to its monomer form glucose, which is what we can then absorb and the shark can absorb as nutrients. Obviously, if nothing gets broken down, then there was no enzyme there to begin with. So we can measure over time how much that enzyme is breaking down. So we do that a similar procedure for all the different types of enzymes in that sense.
Nice. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've always, I mean, I'm a mute swan ecologist, so it's always fun to see how other people do their research with things I have like no knowledge of, just passing knowledge of whenever I happen to randomly run into someone else at a conference and learn how they do their work. Because I always find it interesting how you can just pick apart the different things that animals are eating and all the different ways you can figure out. Like you don't necessarily always have to, straight up, slice them open all the time. You can figure out, through like, analyzing their science poop or other ways, or just taking samples. It's always, there's so many different cool ways that you can find out things about animals, and it's one of the like the neat things that you're doing that I'm finding. But can you tell us a little bit about some of the skill sets that you need for doing the research that you do? Like what skills do you think have helped you the most? Is it just pure ID skills? Have you like GIS skills are always seem to be so popular in ecology. Like what other skill sets have helped you kind of prepare for your research and you feel have been like the most helpful to you?
Sure. So I've definitely had to learn a lot about biochemistry, which to be honest, I was not great at in high school and even in undergrad. So it's kind of ironic that I ended up as a biochemist. But I had to learn a lot about biochemistry, a lot about digestive physiology. In terms of the field work, that was a lot of learning on the go, learning where I could find the sharks, being able to talk to locals in the area who would have a better idea of where to find them, where to rent boats, where to get the right kind of chum, things like that. So a lot of what I've learned for the field work, I've just learned by talking to people and troubleshooting. Because a lot of times, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, when you're doing graduate work, you're the first one that's doing a lot of these things. So you kind of have to figure out things as you go. And sometimes there's not always someone else that you can ask for help because no one's done it before. So a lot of times just reading about what people have done before me has been really helpful. I've definitely needed to learn a lot of different lab techniques. I didn't know how to do enzyme assays before coming to graduate school, but now I know how to do a lot of them. Definitely had to learn about stable isotope analyses. That's how we use the blood samples that we take to measure whether that carbon-13 tracer was in the blood. So definitely learning lots of new things every day, still to this day. And then when we get into more of the microbial work that we're starting now, learning a lot about DNA extractions and PCR and more molecular tools like that.
Great. Yeah, it's always for me. I feel like the skills that I learned from just doing my research. It's always interesting to see like what I would have had the skill set beforehand that would have helped me. Like I know for sure like my ID skills, it would be something I would have loved to have a better grasp on before I started. My research would have been helpful, but you don't realize that until like you're in the middle of your research and you're just like, oh, I need this skill and I need it now because I'm already in the field.
Yeah, you learn it really quickly.
Yes, exactly. So, can you tell us a little bit more too about the University of California, Irvine? How good of a school is this? Like a really, good school for, what you're doing? You feel like you've, gotten a lot of good skill sets out of there? Like, how robust is it for marine biology? Because I will admit, there's always so many different universities out there and you hear bits and pieces, but like, are they a good place for marine biology? Or are they just starting out? Like, give us a little bit of rundown of how UC Irvine is.
So as of right now, UC Irvine actually doesn't have a marine science major for undergraduates. And the department that I'm in as a graduate student is actually ecology and evolutionary biology. There happens to be a lot of marine-focused people within the department. So even though we don't necessarily have a marine science department, it's definitely a product of just the faculty that have been recruited and are currently working here that have made kind of more of a marine community. So I'm really lucky that I do get to work with other people who study marine systems. Currently, I'm the only person studying sharks in our department, but there are a lot of other people that are studying fish and intertidal zones and things like that. So in terms of marine science, definitely not necessarily something specific for undergrads just yet, but hopefully in the future that's something that could be developed.
Yeah, so that's one thing I've found interesting. I was the only mute swan ecologist for a long time at my university, and trying to find other researchers who would be able to answer my questions, I had to go outside of my university and even outside the country sometimes to find those answers. So how eclectic is your committee there, your research committee? Is it, a lot of people from outside the university there that you have on your committee?
No, actually. So my committee is actually made up of all people at my university. They all study different aspects of parts that are relative to my project. So obviously my advisor is a digestive physiologist, so he's really knowledgeable about nutritional physiology, particularly in fishes in general. And then I have members on my committee who are focused on microbes specifically, or study what else? Different ocean systems for myself. So still marine, but kind of more of an ecological perspective on things rather than physiology. So all things that are related to my project, but I'm still the only one, even out of my committee members, that studies or has ever studied sharks before. So I do seek advice from other people, hence my collaborators in Florida that have been really great. But yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily necessary for your committee members to be experts in everything that you're doing, because kind of the idea is to get different perspectives on your project. So I think that that's actually been really helpful.
Good. That's good to hear that. So just a reminder, everyone out there watching the broadcast, we're talking to Samantha Leigh. She's from University of California, Irvine. If you have any questions for her about her research with bonnethead sharks, please feel free to send in the questions via the integrated chat module here on Periscope. And if you're watching this on replay, feel free to send your questions in to us via Twitter handles. You can reach me at Science or Sicom Monday, or at my personal handle of Wildlife BioGal, and you can reach Sam at her Twitter handle of CScienceSam, which is C_science_Sam on Twitter. And so feel free to reach out to us with your questions. We'd love to answer them. So when you're studying sharks, what's some of maybe the biggest misconceptions that people have about your species and the research that you're doing when you're telling people about it? Like, what's like the first question that they come up with that you're like, nope, that's not true?
So a lot of times they just think all hammerheads are the same, which they're not. There's actually now 10 different species of hammerheads that have been identified. So there's a lot more that people think. Another question that I get kind of a lot is, what can this information be used for? Why do we care that a shark is eating seagrass material? And my answer to that is that sharks in general are still considered to be predators. So they're consuming a lot of the food items that humans also rely on for food and economic resources. To kind of put it in perspective a little bit, the fishing industry in the U.S. provides over 1.5 million jobs to Americans and over $90 billion per year to the economy. So it's a really important industry. And if there are not sharks to be able to control the biodiversity of the different species that we also depend on, then a lot of those ecosystems will collapse. So sharks are definitely apex predators, and learning as much as we can about what they're consuming, how they're consuming it, and then also what they're excreting into their environments is really important for being able to develop effective shark conservation policy and also habitat and fisheries management policy.
Yeah, I always find it, interesting, the misconceptions that people have about our research and things like that. I guess, what are you surprised with that people are most knowledgeable about when it comes to your species and your research that you would think that they wouldn't get, but like are always pretty much like that they have that concept down?
Yeah, so I mean, sharks, I'm kind of lucky, are a pretty charismatic species. A lot of people, love sharks, love Shark Week. So they definitely at least have some background about what sharks are, that there are lots of different species and that they live in different areas all around the world. So that's something that I guess a lot of people kind of already have some background knowledge on. In terms of what they're eating, I'm always surprised that people actually do know that they eat, more than just large marine mammals and things like that. So that's good that people are getting that they're eating lots of different things. But one thing that people don't always realize is that what sharks eat and what they actually get out of their food could be two totally different things. So that's kind of what my research is getting into a little bit more, is what they're actually getting out of the food that they're eating.
Great. Yeah, it's that's the one of the things I always loved about Shark Week, is I feel like it really educates a lot of people and lets them know, and learn about, the science and, all the interesting natural history facts about sharks. Have bonnetheads ever actually been featured on Shark Week that you know of?
They actually have been. I think it was last year, there was an episode that was doing sensory systems of sharks. I think it actually might have been the Sharks versus Dolphins episode, when they were comparing kind of the skill set of sharks versus dolphins. And they were looking at bonnetheads and their ability to sense electromagnetic waves. So they were actually on Shark Week.
Nice. Yeah, that must have been fun to be like, yay, there's my species.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, if I could ever get someone to do a show on mute swans, I'd be like, yes.
Someone should do that, definitely.
Yeah, they should. I mean, come on, they're charismatic, they're cute and beautiful. Why not? I mean, they're perfect for TV. They just don't quite have, like, the cool thing as sharks do. And do you find that it's, people are more interested in your research just because it is, something that is so popular, such as sharks, that they are more keen to be listening to your research versus, some of us who might study some species or topics that aren't of that interesting, if people are like, okay, I'll go find someone else. But do you find it's really easy to get people to listen to you? And then, once you've got them listening to your research, that they understand it and are like, willing to listen and be able to make more educated decisions because they're interested in that particular species?
Yeah, so I think that just sharks in general, it can go both ways. So sharks kind of have a bad rap in that they're like, considered to be these really scary sea monsters almost that, are man-eating. And so they get a bad rep in that sense. But because of that, they're also really interesting to people. People kind of fear and respect sharks, so they want to know as much as they can about them. And that's another misconception. So sharks are definitely not just man-eating machines out there trying to kill all humans that they can.
So it's not just the movie Jaws that's happening. It's
no, not at all.
Yeah, it's something interesting I've seen is where how people perceive sharks really is how it's perceived in the media. And if you have a newspaper that says, okay, shark attacks human versus shark mistakenly bites human, you can really get that community's thought process completely swayed one way or the other depending on how the media portrays it. And you feel like that there's been more of a shift to that more mistaken idea of of sharks accidentally biting humans, which usually is the case. They're not going out and oh, there's a human, I'm gonna go gnaw on them, versus the sensationalized shark attacks human. Do you feel like you've been seeing a change in that with how the media is portraying them?
I think there's a lot more consultation with experts in the field after an event like that occurs, which definitely I think eases people's mind at least a little bit, because then they have an expert's point of view of how an event like that could have happened. So I think over time it is getting better, especially with science communication such as this becoming more and more popular. People are getting more of the full story, not just the quick 2-minute news segment about it. So yeah, I think it's getting better. Definitely not all the way there yet, but it's getting there.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because it's always, it's interesting how just something as simple as how the media, TV or newspaper, or, say live streams like this are portraying a particular animal, is how, humans are going to be thinking about it and, reacting to it, and possibly, if we say it was a mistaken ID, people see a shark, they're not going to go out there and try to harm it, versus if we say a shark attacks human, all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of boaters out there probably trying to attack the first shark that they see, even if it might have had nothing to do with it at all. So
yeah, definitely.
So are there any things out there that's happening, either fishing or otherwise, that could be possibly putting the Bonnethead shark at risk in the future? Are you noticing possible impacts of climate change, starting to pop up with the species, even though they're robust? Just because it's robust right now, maybe down the line, you could see some warning signs now that might cause the severe issues down the future.
Yeah, so right now, the bonnethead shark is still considered to be a very healthy population of sharks. Globally, I don't think they're endangered anywhere. But I mean, over time, that definitely has the potential to change. They're not quite as at risk as some of the larger, more pelagic species that might be caught as bycatch during large fishing trawls and things like that. So that's kind of one good thing for them. They also reproduce relatively quickly, so some sharks take a lot longer to reproduce than others. And bonnethead sharks also give live birth, so they're not producing eggs that are, at risk just floating around in the ocean. So that helps as well. So right now they're still pretty robust. Definitely over time, as climate change continues to occur and oceans are warming, their distributions could change, which could definitely have an effect on them and on the ecosystems that they start to inhabit as they start to move into what are now cooler waters but could be warming. So that could definitely have an effect on them. But right now they still seem to be doing very well. So stay tuned.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's always interesting to see how species could be impacted by different things coming up in the future, and you start seeing those warning signs, and you always kind of wonder, like, okay, how much is it going to impact it? Um, are there any like fishing pressures on bonnetheads? Does anyone eat them? Because we always hear about shark fin soup and other things like that. Is there any desire to eat bonnetheads at all? Is there like a fishing industry for it, or even like casual fishing? Just your everyday fishermen wanting to go out and catch them. That could be putting pressure on the population.
There is casual fishing for them. There's no real fishing industry for bonnethead sharks, as far as I'm aware. So local fishermen could catch them and eat them. People do eat them, but they're not.
Taste good, or
I don't know. I've never had one. I imagine not. They don't actually. I mean, they're pretty small, slender sharks, so I can't imagine that they would be that great. But I actually don't know. I've never tried one. But in terms of being at risk for like shark fin soup, like you mentioned, as far as I know, no. There are definitely lots of other species that are targeted for that still in a lot of other countries, not so much in the US, but that's a definite risk for other members of the hammerhead family.
Yeah, since you said that, bonnetheads are so wide ranging, are there different subspecies of the bonnethead that could possibly be put into, endangered or threatened status? Those particular subspecies could be potential. And like, if there are subspecies, like how many different subspecies are there of bonnethead that you know of?
Right now, there is not. I know that there is an investigation recently that does think that there could potentially be two different species of bonnetheads. But in terms of evaluating how they're doing population-wise, broken up into those two different species, I don't think there's been any analysis of that.
So anybody out there who wants to do it, there you go. There's a PhD study right there for you.
There you go.
Yeah. So what other like cool facts about bonnetheads can you tell us that nobody knows about that is like would be fun and interesting to know about them?
So this again isn't necessarily about bonnetheads in specifically, but about all sharks, and then we can kind of narrow it down to hammerheads. But all sharks have this really unique part of their digestive tract called a spiral intestine. So it essentially acts like our small intestine would. However, instead of being just a straight open tube, it literally, in some cases, looks like a spiral staircase with tissue kind of going around cylindrically inside of the intestine. And the thought behind it is that it likely increases absorptive tissue surface area so they can absorb more nutrients, and also that it slows the rate of passage of digesta through the gut. So lots of sharks are known for consuming really large meals on an infrequent basis, so possibly going, days, weeks without eating. So having this spiral intestine to slow the movement of digesta through their gut helps them make sure that they're really getting all of the nutrients out of it that they can. And this spiral intestine comes in what we know now to be 4 different shapes. So there's that stereotypical spiral staircase, and then there are 2 different varieties of more of like a funnel shape. And then hammerheads have what's actually called a scroll intestine in that region. So instead of spiraling kind of from the beginning to the end of the digestive tract, it almost spirals like horizontally around the entire gut. So it's very, very strange. So that's something kind of unique about hammerheads in general.
I feel like that would make like a really cool National Geographic or like zoo book, like, figure, of drawing of that. Because I always liked the, when they would take you like inside and be able to show you like how sharks work. That'd be neat to see like the different stomachs, or intestines, along the way, and see how they are. Because that would be like cool to be able to actually picture that and have that.
That's actually one of the other projects that I'm working on now, is doing more of a morphological analysis of all these different spiral intestines, because mainly what we know about them is from dissections, which are great, but then you kind of inherently have to damage the intact spiral structure itself, or from histological images, so looking at more of the tissue in the spiral intestine regions and how it changes. But in terms of just how flow is occurring of digesta through these regions, there's really not a lot of information. So I'm actually different spiral intestines as I can from different shark families and make more of a digital library of them from CT scan images, so that we can start to have these 3D images of a full intact shark spiral intestine, and then be able to use that to make morphological measurements without having to use the actual intestine itself.
Oh, that's great. That's really interesting. I like that idea because, yeah, once you've got that nice library, you can really see comparisons, across different species and within the species itself to see the variability between all of them. So,
yeah, and right now we really don't know in terms of if it's diet that's affecting it. Is it, phylogeny? We don't really know. So hopefully this project can start to get at the root of some of those questions too.
So is this a species and a project that you hope to continue on past your PhD, or you want to jump into other things, maybe other sharks or maybe other complete systems, or how much into the shark research fun do you want to keep diving into?
I would love to keep working on sharks. There is kind of a lot of wide open space in terms of learning about their digestive physiology, especially looking at their microbial communities. As far as I know, there's only been 2 studies that have really done a microbiome analysis of sharks. And there are over 500 species of sharks now. So there's definitely kind of a lot of room to learn about them. I would also love to look at the bonnethead and compare it to other closely related species, for example, the scalloped hammerhead, to see if there are other species that are capable of doing the seagrass digestion like bonnetheads, and they're just not doing it. So yeah, that's something that I'd hope to do in the future, is comparing them to more shark species that we know that are strictly carnivorous.
Great. Yeah, it's always fun if you can get a little bit of taste of something and then continue it on to see, because I know with my own personal research, I've developed so many questions off of it that I'd love to keep going and trying to answer, but it's, of course, it's always dependent on funding and where you go and what else is out there and what projects are available. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have probably an endless amount of questions about bonnetheads and sharks in general, but
yeah, if you just had all the time and money in the world, you could get all the texts and lab space that you need to be able to study.
I know. Wouldn't that be great?
Oh, it would for sure. It's I know if I ever won the lottery, half of the money probably would be going just to doing research and stuff I want to be able to do.
Yeah, probably the same for me.
Yeah. So just a reminder to everyone out there, as we're starting to close up Sicom Monday here, if you have any questions for Samantha, Leigh, and myself, please send those in via the integrated chat module here on Periscope, and we'll do our best to get them answered here in the last few minutes of Sicom Monday this week. And if you're watching it on replay, definitely send your questions in via Twitter. We'll do our best to answer them. You can reach me at Wildlife BioGal or at the show's handle of Sicom Monday. And you can reach Sam at her handle, which is CScienceSam, which is C_science_Sam. And definitely send in your questions, because we love answering. That's the whole reason why we do this. We like hearing what your questions are and do our best to answer them, because it's always fun when you interact with the audience out there. They come up with some really interesting questions. So anything we could do to answer that and stretch our brains a little, we definitely would love to do. So as we're starting to reach into these last 5 minutes here of Sicom Monday, what's the most interesting story or fieldwork fail maybe, or maybe fieldwork awesomeness that you had while you're out and about doing your research?
Yeah, so actually the first summer that I went to collect bonnetheads, one thing that was kind of a bummer was there was a big hurricane right in the middle of my field season. So not only did that delay my ability to be able to collect the sharks, but it seemed like we had a more difficult time even finding them, because we went out right after the hurricane, and there just weren't as many out there at that time, I guess. So that was kind of a bummer. One of the most fun memories I have from being out in the field, It's probably this past summer when I went, and we were out collecting sharks, and I wasn't actually with any of my collaborators who are professors or more senior scientists at the university, and I started to kind of realize that I was the one that was in charge on the boat and knew where to find the sharks and knew the whole procedure and how to get everything done. And that was kind of exciting for me to kind of feel like I was the one that had the most knowledge of my project on the boat and about the sharks in general. So that was really cool.
Yeah, it's always a fun task when all of a sudden you realize people are looking to you for answers, and you're like, wait, what? When did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, having been a team lead for different studies and things like that, it was always, whoa, I get to decide now? Oh, I gotta really get on my game here.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
It's also always interesting whenever we're out on the water. We're out there all day just waiting to catch sharks. So seeing other wildlife around is always great. I'm always a little nervous that we're going to run into a juvenile bull shark or something like that when we're working for bonnetheads. But so far, knock on wood, that hasn't happened yet. So
yeah, what's the most interesting species besides your bonnetheads that you've seen while you're out there that was like so exciting for you to see, and you're trying to grab photos of it and things like that while you're on the water?
We've seen a couple nurse sharks while we've been out collecting bonnetheads. Definitely lots of species of fish. Just in the boat in transit between the place where we collect bonnetheads and the school, we've seen manatees and sea turtles and lots of great species that don't necessarily get to see all the time on the West Coast out here. So that was really fun for me.
Yeah, that's definitely got to be a lot of fun when you get to, like you said, see things that you don't normally get to see. I know right now I'm really got my fingers crossed that we'll have some snowy owls coming down through here. There's
Oh,
been a lot of
cool.
reports of them in southern lower Michigan here, but I have not yet seen one, and I just keep peeling my eyes, looking out the window every day, like, is there one out there now?
Oh, that'd be awesome. Definitely got to
Yeah.
snap a picture if you see one.
For sure. And it's like anytime you could see something that you don't normally get to see in your everyday stuff, it's just always a real treat. So getting to see manatees and other things like that, I'm sure, where it's just an absolute blast, especially when you see it for the first time. It's like, ooh, yes.
Yeah, always really exciting.
Yeah. So for everyone out there watching the broadcast right now, we're just about out of time. So I definitely want to send a big thank you to Samantha Leigh for coming on the broadcast. I really appreciate having you on today, Sam, and definitely like all your research with bonnetheads and everything. Thank you for educating us about them. And if anyone's got any questions, I'm sure you're going to be available on Twitter for everyone if they've got any questions.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Great. Well, if you've got questions for Sam, if you're watching this on replay, or you just happen to jump in here at the last minute, or you just were too shy to ask any questions during the broadcast, which could happen, feel free to reach Samantha at CScienceSam, which is C_science_Sam on Twitter. You can reach me at Wildlife Bogout or at the Sicom Monday handle. And then just a reminder for everyone that next week we'll be talking to Dr. Jason Oregon. He's from Indiana University, and he goes by Oregon JM on Twitter. And he's going to be talking to us about their Sicom program that they have there that they have started recently. And so we're going to be talking about things of like how improv can help your science communication. So definitely tune in for that. It'll be a lot of fun, and maybe we can see if we can get Jason to give us some improv games to play live on air. So with that, we want to thank everyone for supporting Sicom Monday, especially our Patreon sponsors. You guys really do help us out and make Sicom Monday possible. I want to definitely send a special thank you to our major Patreon sponsor, Jason Leathers. He goes by I4MSU on Twitter. Big shout out and thank you to him. And if you are able to help us, please go to our Patreon site. We try to do our best to get everything as crowdsourced as possible, so that way we can keep bringing the science to you. We love doing these in-studio remote broadcasts with scientists all over the world. We also like going out into the field to do these fieldwork live broadcasts, and we want to do as much as we can to bring science to you where it's easy for you to get it on Periscope and there on social media. And with that, I just want to send another quick thing out there for everyone. If you are a scientist or a Sicommer and you want to come on the broadcast like Sam did today, please contact us, direct message us on Twitter at Sicom Monday, and we'll do our best to see about bringing you on. We've had so many scientists from all over the world, from Europe to South America to North America to Australia and everywhere in between. We've had them on a whole bit different ranges of topics and academic standing, and just come and talk to us. We love hearing from all of you, and it's always a real fun and a real treat for us. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone today for tuning in. Go explore, do some science, have some fun, and we'll see you on the next Sicom Monday.